Okay, looks like folks are still trickling in, but maybe we can start proceedings by adding the agenda in the chat, and then over to you, Igor and Adam. I think Mark can't make it today, right?
Yes, it seems he couldn't make it.
Cool. Okay, the agenda is here in the chat, and I guess welcome everybody to CDS Squid BlueStore session. I'll keep the introduction short, and over to you, Igor and Adam.
So that's it. We start. That's the time. Yeah, let me start with summary report on what we're going on with problems around locators in BlueStore. We decided this year that we will tackle the problem in deep, and we started a GSOC cooperation project with intention to make an allocator simulator that's external tool to BlueStore, but it will replace as close as possible existing workloads and add some synthetic. That's not fully understood how it will be generated, but it will be. The goal is to make a prediction on how our changes to allocators will influence deployed OSDs months and years after we make change to code. So basically, the intention is to no longer release any change that will in long future requires us to maintain and provide the quick fixes and patch problems like this. The work continues, I would say, timely. We already had a framework simulator. Now we're adding metrics and improving metrics. That's important because we want to have fragmentation metrics that do encompass free space, object fragmentation, and also burden that is being exposed on object due to fragmentation, because we don't want to even consider as a relevant fragmentation when separate fragment of a single object are never accessed in one row. So that's it. It's going on, and I think we will make it work in Squid. It should be able to fit that endeavor in Squid. The second topic is one can already see a link to APR. Igor already started improving on allocator by mixing new strategy with B-tree allocator and hybrid, but it's not yet tested, so we will see how good that one behaves. Possibly that will be the first one that will be put through a fragmentation simulator testing. Next part is we're, in addition to making allocators try to behave as nicely as possible, we also intend to add defragmentation. For now, it's not really, I'm not really sure how the algorithm will work, but the first step in Squid from my side is to at least introduce some primitives that will allow to make some attempt to defragment objects. So it will be like some queues, some sniffing on empty free cycles on object store and so on. So just having the first step will be to create a set of primitives that will allow to actually implement algorithm later. And that's possible to squeeze that into Squid. But of course, not the fragmentation algorithm itself. I don't believe it will work. The next topic that is mostly already there is a modification called new feature in BlueStore called elastic shared blobs. It's related with cloning objects. We noticed Mark Nelson and Paul Kozner during tests discovered that the way we operate on shared blobs when cloning made it very inefficient when we were just spamming a lot of blobs. Now we're trying to keep the amount of blobs in check, and even though the shared blobs themselves are much more complicated in their structure, the overall gain is very significant. It does not fix all the problems related with snaps and especially snap trimming. We still have some cases when just listing snaps it causes significant performance problems. That's yet to be fixed. But that snap listing is unrelated to BlueStore. And that feature was needed for RDR, and so we made backport to a downstream already for Quincy and for Reef. And we're now having some split between BlueStore, that's the original code, and we were not really sure how much additional problems we inject by putting quite significant change to low levels in BlueStore into the code. So we create a separated object store, BlueStore RDR. It's just the same, almost the same compilation as original BlueStore, but features related to elastic shared blobs have been enabled. So that way, we still risk some hidden errors will hit us in RDR product, but no regular other BlueStore deployments will be affected by it. We intend to keep it in upstream Quincy and Reef, and then it should in Squid just merge together into one implementation. It will for some time we will have just two names for the same BlueStore. That's the estimation how it will work in future. The next topic is Podel. That's an algorithm for flow control. We have one very now quite old TR. The intention is to meaning choose between having a bit smaller latency and a bit larger throughput. So if we detect that we have a lot of IOPS pending in BlueStore, we then create larger batches of transactions, and therefore increasing latency, but larger batches basically we are more performant in processing them, so we get higher overall throughput. And on the other hand, if we see that there is not much, and there's not a lot of inflow of new operations to object store, we just process them in a smaller transaction, thus reducing latency. Similar to that is a second PR that Mark Nelson made recently. It it follows very similar logic, but on the KV sync thread level, just inside BlueStore machinery, allowing to put more RocksDB transactions together, depending on how much those transactions are dripping in to that level. So it's basically exactly the same concept, but implemented in a completely different level of stack. Maybe we will merge both, maybe only Codel. I'm not sure yet. I think we should somehow test how those two solutions can cooperate, because it might be that they will create not very nice a feedback loop, that one a counter feedback loop, that one will be countering the other. So meaning the Codel will enqueue more operations, and then Mark Nelson's solution will see that we now start having a larger inflow, so we will split that into a smaller batches. So that requires testing. But Codel was their first, so I would think it should go as the primary solution. More on BlueStore future, I intend to create a new type of object node. That's a BlueStore specific element that is a representation of an object. Currently, we have the one called onode, and it just represents object, and it has a very complicated, very elaborate metadata structure, able to fulfill all the cases we can have. Compression, having shared blobs, holes in objects, just everything is able to be, every case that can happen in object store is handled by onode. But the cost of processing that metadata is high, both on just CPU cycles and trashing on memory, meaning we just allocate a lot of small fragments, and we tend to fragment memory. The idea is to create something like a framework that will be compatible with existing BlueStore processing machinery, like ingesting of transaction, state processing, and all that we currently have in BlueStore, but allowing to create own metadata. The intention is to cover most of the cases, the simple cases like 4 megabyte RBD objects with a very basic metadata. That means there will be only one checksum type able to be selected, and possibly it will be just CRC32 without any options. There will be a flat map of mapping between disk and logical offset of an object. And when metadata in object will become large, it will not be split in arbitrary places. like now, but it will be fixed points that do split object into smaller pieces, like 1 MB or something. So the target is to make it very simple for both very fast for decoding when read from RocksDB, and very fast for modification when we do allocation and override inside object. I'm not sure if that will become a part of BlueStore. It just depends whether it testing will show us some beneficial gains. That's basically it. And in any case, the result of that work will be that we should have a framework for providing other experiments with different types of metadata. And hello, yes?
Just a question, if I may.
Sure.
Is it thinkable to use this approach to gradually get rid of the encryption / compression outside of, let's say, core BlueStore, and maybe put it into, I don't know, some kind of adapter, wrapper, something like that? In other words, to make the cleanup in a gradual way.
Okay, I don't think it can be executed that way, but we can have two types of O nodes at the same time in BlueStore. So it might be that if that experiment goes nicely, then for a simple object, the simplified metadata will be used. But if for any reason object executes something different, like compression or tries to clone itself or whatever, then a special transformation will transform from the new simplified metadata model to the old one. That can be done easily, but it's not completely removing either cloning or compression from BlueStore. It still is there to provide existing functionality. And that way, only if you re-implement compression to new O nodes, you could remove it from the old ones, the most generic one. So yeah, I think that answers it.
You can't probably remove compression at all from the original code base, since you have existing deployments which should keep working.
Correct. For as long as a backward compatibility is considered, we cannot remove compression. We could stop using it or use another compression methods in new deployments, but existing ones is just a limitation. That's perfectly correct. Okay, the next topic is custom write-ahead lock. Igor, can I please get your opinion on that?
Yeah. The idea is to move or re-implement write-ahead lock at BlueStore level rather than have it at RocksDB. And the purpose is to reduce the latency for write operations. This is provided by the fact that we can indicate indicate write confirmation back to upper levels a bit faster when we have write-ahead lock at BlueStore level, and hence, since we avoid transactions queue in BlueStore in that case sync thread, and we avoid waiting for all the transactions from the batch BlueStore sends to RocksDB. And this would allow us to have less operation latency, write latency. I've been working on that for a while, and I have more or less working engineering version of it at the moment. It's still needs some polishing and bug fixing. At least I've got POC available at the moment. So hopefully this fit into Squid.
Thank you. And the last topic is the most open topic because the all previous ones were just more or less reporting on already existing and the work that was already decided will be ongoing. The last topic is about the policies of refactors and backporting. Basically, we notice, and I most strongly noticed recently, that when I modify large portions of code in BlueStore, there is a significant risk that it will become not really nice for backporting any features to previous versions. The example of a large backport is in the link provided that Igor made a comprehensive backport of improvements we made in BlueFS back to Pacific. And there are basically, I would like to talk here about two a bit separated topics. One is how far back we want to backport features. I guess that when we made a error and we have to provide a bug fix, that's obvious. We must do it as far back as possible. But when we create new value, new feature, we very often backport it also as far as possible, as sometimes even further. Meaning, sometimes we have to modify our original solution in order to be possible to backport, or we have to get along some earlier modifications in order to provide backport. I get a suspicion that we're doing that because customers that want to upgrade to new versions, but they need some new features. So in the sense, we are making that road for them, just putting new behaviors into old software. Sometimes it works very well, and sometimes we usually are successful with it. But I'm afraid that it might also be, there can be also cases when we break those old behaviors. And I would like to open a question, the discussion on what should be our policy of backporting features, especially if we have something new that definitely looks good, but is still not, it still did not run for a long time enough in main to get us very sure that it's really working as it should, as intended, and there's no bad consequences.
Adam, just to add to your words, in my opinion, there is also another aspect of this stuff, which is sometimes, or pretty often, we can say, we can name the patch exclusively bug or feature. So some improvement in design, some improvement in performance. So patches intended to improve some design stuff or some performance. They are not completely new feature, and they are not completely a bug fix. For instance, 4K support for BlueFS, it's hard to distinguish completely if it's a bug feature, since we have some issues in deployments due to absence of this support on one hand, but on the other hand, it's rather some new functionality. And I believe these doubtful patches are the major headache in regard to your question. So it's quite easy, simple to say that we forbid reporting new features, real new features, well, like something like custom write-ahead log. But there are some patches which are hard to distinguish if it's fixed or new feature. So, and given that, I'm afraid we will be unable to set up straightforward policy, since these corner cases or intermediate cases are the most questionable stuff. It's hard to set up any straightforward policy, in my opinion, for that.
Well, on the other hand, I agree that backporting to Reef and Quincy is very easy. Those two versions are really very close to each other. But Pacific is a bit divergent now.
Right. So as an input factors, we have our understanding. First, we on this, at first we have our understanding if it's a bug or feature, and at second we have patch complexity or backport. The full backport complexity. So our policy should depend on this, on both factors, then at least these two factors.
I guess that the more incompatible modifications, like real code cleanups, will be applied to BlueStore, the more difficulty will arise on backporting, and the more backports would become not only straight cherry picks, but actual work on resolving conflicts with significantly increased risk of errors. That would be the moment I will be even more worried about pulling backports very quickly and very far to the past.
So this means that some modifications to the code base might block backporting. So after significant cleanup, we might want to avoid backports as much as possible.
Which in some sense might defeat purpose of a cleanup if we're, oh, maybe not. I mean, I'm really thorn here, because on the one hand, a cleanup is a good thing, but if a cleanup will block backporting and we would want to make them, then it's like not really simplifying anything, but making more ugly, more difficult.
Well, that's not about cleanups exclusively. It's mostly about redesign, I'd say. So significant code redesign and reworking of its internal, that's what prevents us from easy backporting.
Yeah, I agreed. I called cleanup in the sense that actually significant portions of maybe not logic, but significant portions of code start moving around, at least in some PRs.
I mean, my 2 cents on this is that it's not just about BlueStore; it's about in general in Ceph, right? Like we've,
Definitely.
yeah, this is a broader topic, and we are just like the brave ones to talk about it in the BlueStore meeting. But my 2 cents is that from a user perspective, I understand like doing major upgrades is harder. Doing point release upgrades is easier, given that there is a motivation that yes, I upgrade to this point release and I get this particular BlueStore fix or improvement or whatever you want to call it. But there is the other sector of the users that is also complaining about, hey, this wasn't called out even in the release notes and we upgraded, and hey, now there's a completely new behavior that we are getting which we didn't even know. So I guess there is a balance about like how aggressive we are about backporting. And we talked about this a little bit in CDM, right? Like, can things be turned off? Can things be off by default if you're doing backports, so that there are no sudden surprises for people who don't really care about the shiny new feature, but prefer stability over anything else, right? So I guess that's the final balance that we have to maintain going forward. And yeah, things like refactors make it even harder. So maybe it's a good thing because that makes us think twice about like, should we even backport this? That question needs to be asked more often, unless like it's a major bug fix that we cannot avoid.
No, obviously we're not talking here about things that we cannot avoid. It's more about
right, nice to have, right?
nice to have, and
Yeah,
it's good for a developer. It seems to be move into a good direction. But if on specific line of software we only expect to have one more release or something, then the cleanup refactor is basically a waste of time. And
right,
that also maybe should be taken into account in BlueStore, or no, maybe not yet, but in future.
right. But like you said, like there are two releases that we maintain. So there's always n-2. Like you said, Pacific is becoming harder. So maybe we start with like aggressively not backporting anything to the n-2 release. Maybe n-1 is definitely going to be easier. So there our criteria can be looser. For example, if you have to backport anything to Reef now, it's probably not going to be that hard, right? But if you want to backport anything to Pacific, very hard. Quincy somewhere in the middle.
Well, actually,
Pacific is
it's
still
not.
is still hard. The previous than Pacific, it's really hard.
Right. So it's hard. So let's yeah. Go ahead, Igor.
Yeah, I believe it's not a question about how far you backport it. Well, the farther you do that, the more probable you get some issues. But you can still have the same problem backporting to Reef, for example, if you introduce severe changes to master branch. So
Right. Right. I mean, so again, I'm just wearing a user's hat. So if I'm, for example, running a very mature point release of Pacific, maybe, .11, I expect fewer, newer changes to come in versus if I'm running a reef, maybe the first point release or second point release, I expect, okay, things will change more aggressively. That, again, that's depending on what we are backporting, right? But from a user perspective, if I want to be on a stable release, I don't expect upgrading from a Pacific, .11 to .12. That okay, I get a completely new BlueStore behavior. So that's another data point.
Yeah, I agree. It might be, and I did not take that into account, that customers run their versions for a long time because they like their predictability and um, the constant quality, let's say like that.
Yeah, the older you become, the more, the slower you are, right? So that's kind of the idea, but yeah. And what do other folks think? This is probably something broader than BlueStore. So I would love to hear opinions that folks may have. Or have we run into some challenges where we've done such a backport and then we've like, no, it was a very bad idea? Any experience? Go ahead, Radek.
My view, what I personally perceive as the biggest source of value of BlueStore, it's its stability. That it's basically well-known object, well-tested, field-proven object store implementation. And the less we are poking with it in older releases, the better. Main is something different, actually. On the other hand, I don't want to starve the development of BlueStore.
Well, if that would be the metric, then not backporting anything would be the strongest encouragement to keeping BlueStore developed. And also will be a stronger incentive for customers to move to newer versions.
Agreed.
The problem is that we do not backport due to, well, some dreams or our tend to beautiful code. So any backport, in fact, is required for some purposes, and so sometimes it fixes some issues. Sometimes it provides better monitoring, inspection, whatever, and so on and so forth. So yeah, no one is suggesting to backport just a clean up to make code readable back to Pacific, but yeah, so and yeah, most of users might be satisfied with current minor release, but sometimes we might need to bring new patches to fix real customer problems. And yeah, and given the history of changes from Pacific to master, sometimes they are not that straightforward and might be complicated. So I don't know. I'm afraid there are no real answer to this question. So there are no straightforward policy available.
Well,
it's always a matter of
to use that example of your work, Igor, as some concrete thing. True, there are problems with Pacific, with fragmentation that can be solved with backporting that BlueFS fixes for 4K alloc size. But at the same time, that could be fixed by upgrading to Quincy. And that's exactly the core of my question. How much should we just resist backporting further than it's just a simple cherry pick? Because from Reef and Quincy, that was just a cherry pick and went without a problem. But Pacific required some extra effort. Maybe we should just tell customers that no, we will not backport it and they should upgrade to Quincy.
Well, definitely this is doable as well. I don't know the proper answer to that question, to be honest. Yeah, we can enforce customer to upgrade indeed. On the other hand, having some issues which cause SD to stop working completely isn't good as well.
Maybe the problem is even of the other kind. Maybe we should be able to upgrade Object Store, BlueStore, independently of other parts of software. Because that's a bit specific case with BlueStore that is so much separated from other components that it almost seems possible to do so.
I don't believe it's BlueStore specific, to be honest. So you might imagine any issues with existing metadata format for CFFS, for example, which cause MDS to stop working, and you need to upgrade, bring backport some new stuff to fix that. So,
Okay, guys. Last, please chime in on your opinion on the topic. Okay, in that sense, I'm reading from the public that the topic is mostly over. We should, I guess, think about it and continue on the next meeting if there is any systemic approach to this that we want to apply. I guess for now it's just undecided and divisive topic, and we keep existing approach, namely we just do what we feel at the heat of the moment, and we'll continue it for now.
yeah, I'm afraid such cases should be considered one by one, and
I agree. So exactly, I agree. And whenever that next opportunity comes, maybe we should get together and ask those questions again, and take a decision based on that.
Guys,
So, yeah.
how about moving this discussion out of teleconferences to a PR? How about writing at least our feelings towards general, writing our general, very high level principles for doing with the case? How about putting this into a node, even a short one doc in the development section of documentation? And then we can move the discussion. We could reuse the machinery of GitHub to discuss and refine this further.
Yeah, I like it.
Can,
I could take a time to make a decision and then changing my decision, and everyone will be tracked. Everything will be tracked.
Exactly. And reiterate it if necessary.
Right, and that's how you create a policy, right? So, not a bad idea. So, Radek, I know you have pet peeve for this topic. You want to take ownership of creating that PR, and everybody can chime in.
Good.
Good move, right?
Perfect one. I definitely, well, I'm not owner of BlueStore, but I would love to help you.
No, yeah, I strongly think this is beyond BlueStore. I think whatever policy we make should apply to be
Maybe
Ceph
we should
as a
start
project.
from doing a section
Mhm.
and then linking particular as a sub chapters or something like that, particular
Right.
components.
Right,
And this
right.
will also, in core we have very similar case about let's to just to exemplify the problem with client exposed feature bits. It's a comment in some source file, and nobody wants to make a final stance. Maybe instead of discussing every single item in separation of each other, in separation of the past, maybe we should simply lay the documentation down. Some kinds of written principles, even very general, and that it doesn't block, it should never ever block a justified merge, at the price, of course, of doing some changes in the principles of making the exception, but explicitly.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea to me.
It makes sense. At least it should have some. It would be a place when one could read rationale for some decisions,
Right.
and some policies.
It's
Right.
also I think it's simply easier to discuss using written form, using GitHub, than over a huge amount of very widely spread meetings.
Right. And like it or not, this is not the last time we are having this discussion. We'll probably have this discussion when something else comes up, and then we can say that this is the policy we created. Can we stick to it?
Yep. Yeah, I can recall multiple cases like this one. Every single time when we were poking with the perf counter, there was a discussion: is this a part of our interface? And after fifth reiteration, I don't recall. Simply, I don't recall. I'm sorry, but I don't.
Yep. I agree. I think we shouldn't expect people to read through 50 Etherpads and come to a conclusion about what the policy for the project is. So I agree. Let's at least get something into the documentation, and we can have different policies for different components based on need.
I'm not saying it will succeed, but maybe it's worth trying. Maybe it's worth using a BlueStore as a canary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if we're done with this question, I'd like to bring up one more. And actually, that's a suggestion for another feature to BlueStore. And that's that is having PG log support at BlueStore level, and keep it out of RocksDB and have maybe specific API and persistent data format and handling out of RocksDB. I'm not sure if we will fit that into Squid completely, but maybe we can start some proof of concept working with that.
Igor, could you please elaborate more, because I didn't get what is the gist of the improvement?
The idea is to move to not keep PG log at RocksDB, at least most of it, but keep it in a cyclic in some specific format, for example, cyclic buffer on fast disk, maybe BlueFS, and provide a sort of additional object store API to perform writes and reads from that log.
Okay, so you say no longer PG log. Operations will be a RocksDB key value sets and deletes. It will be something else, just defined by some extra interface.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Interesting. We talked about it. I agree we should try. For now, I don't know how.
Well, technically, I don't see much problem. So it should be doable indeed. I'm not sure if it's beneficial, but in other aspects, it should be doable. So
Yes, I agree. It should be doable, but there is only a discussion how should be pglog operations transmitted alongside with regular operations, so they will form some proper transaction, and we could match them properly later.
I believe this might be something like, so we will still need to update RocksDB on each transaction related to pglog, but most of data to be written to out of RocksDB to disk, and some ID to be provided to be updated at RocksDB, some sequence number or whatever. And this should permit consistency between RocksDB transactions and, well, that definitely needs some workout in development. So just curious if we want to list this stuff here, in case someone would like to choose this work.
But you say we should start work on it, but don't expect to fit it into Squid.
Right, since I believe the first stage should be some investigation if it's really beneficial and worth all the efforts. So right now we can't promise we'll do that. Let's just set that we want to try that.
I'm perfectly fine with that. I just added this as a line to the agenda.
Okay, anything else?
I'm done, thank you.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Igor. Sounds like we are done. With 3 minutes left, so pretty good on time. All right, thank you everybody for joining, and take care. The CDS radio session is in 3 minutes, so quick break time.
Thank you, guys.
See you there.
See you in 3 minutes.
Right.